In the mid-1980s, the lights inside one Los Angeles nightclub burned brighter than almost anywhere else in America. Every night, the line wrapped around the block. Women from across the country flew in just to see the show. The music was loud, the stage lights were blinding, and the performers wore the same iconic uniform that would soon become famous around the world: black pants, bow ties, and bare chests. The show was called Chippendales. What began as a strange idea inside a struggling nightclub quickly turned into a cultural phenomenon. The male dancers weren't just entertainers anymore. They were a brand. Posters covered dorm rooms. Touring shows sold out in cities across the United States. Within a few short years, the business was generating millions of dollars. But behind the stage lights and screaming crowds, something darker was quietly unfolding. Because inside the company that created the show, two men were fighting for control of an empire that was suddenly worth a fortune. And before the decade was over, that fight would end with a gunshot inside a Manhattan office. The man who died that day was Nick DeNoia. On the afternoon of April 7, 1987, DeNoia was working inside a modest production office on the 15th floor of a building on West 40th Street in New York City. The office belonged to his company, Unicorn Productions. DeNoia was no stranger to success. He was a 5-time Emmy Award-winning television producer who had spent years working in children's programming. But in recent years, he had become known for something very different. He had helped transform Chippendales from a small nightclub attraction into a polished touring stage show. That transformation had made the brand famous, but it had also created powerful enemies. At approximately 3:30 that afternoon, a man entered the office. According to the only witness inside the suite, the visitor walked in calmly and asked a simple question: "Is Nick here?" The employee, busy at his desk, barely looked up. He pointed toward the inner office where DeNoia was working and told the stranger that Nick was inside. The man disappeared down the hallway. A few moments later, the employee stepped into the restroom. Seconds after he closed the door, he heard it: a single gunshot. The sound echoed through the quiet office. By the time the employee rushed back into the hallway, it was already over. Nick DeNoia lay dead on the floor. The killer had fired one shot from a 9mm pistol at close range before fleeing the building through the stairwell. By the time police arrived, the shooter had vanished into the streets of Midtown Manhattan, one of the busiest places in the world. Detectives from the NYPD Homicide Department quickly secured the scene. Crime technicians collected the single shell casing left behind by the weapon. Witnesses inside the building described a man with dark hair wearing jeans. Another worker in the freight elevator area remembered seeing someone running from the stairwell moments after the gunshot. But the description was vague, and New York City was full of men who matched it. Within hours, investigators faced a troubling possibility. The killer may have escaped forever. The case fell to NYPD homicide detective Michael Geddes. Like many murders in New York during the 1980s, the case began with very little physical evidence and almost no clear motive. The victim was successful, well-connected, and widely respected. But he had also been involved in a business that was making enormous amounts of money. And money often brings conflict. When detectives spoke with Nick DeNoia's family, one name quickly surfaced: Steve Bannery. Bannery was the founder of Chippendales, the Los Angeles nightclub owner who had first created the all-male dance concept years earlier. He had met Nick DeNoia in the early 1980s while searching for someone who could turn his nightclub act into a national touring show. DeNoia had the production experience. Bannery had the business idea. Together, they built something far bigger than either of them expected. Under DeNoia's direction, the dancers rehearsed choreographed routines, the costumes became standardized, the performances were polished into a stage show that could travel from city to city. The formula worked. Crowds poured into theaters across the country. The Chippendales brand exploded. But as the profits grew, so did the tension between the two partners. According to family members and associates, their relationship had deteriorated badly in the months leading up to the murder. Arguments over money and touring rights had become constant. At the center of the dispute was control over the most profitable part of the business, the traveling stage show. Nick DeNoia believed he owned the touring rights. Bannery believed he deserved a larger share. What began as a partnership had slowly turned into a bitter feud. By early 1987, the conflict had reached a breaking point. DeNoia was preparing to launch a new dance troupe that would compete directly with Chippendales. If it succeeded, it could cost Bannery millions. To investigators, the timing was impossible to ignore. But suspicion alone was not enough to make an arrest. When detectives contacted Bannery in California, he acknowledged the dispute, but denied any involvement in the murder. He told investigators he had spent the entire day in Los Angeles, more than 2,000 miles away from New York. Without evidence placing him near the crime, the case stalled. Police released a sketch based on witness descriptions of the man seen fleeing the building. They offered a reward for information. Detectives interviewed dozens of potential leads. None of them produced a suspect. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. And gradually, the investigation began to fade. To the outside world, it looked like the killer had gotten away with it. But 4 years later, thousands of miles away in Las Vegas, a phone call would arrive at an FBI office that would reopen the entire case. A man on the line claimed that someone had just offered him $25,000 to kill 2 people. And according to the caller, the person behind the plot had ties to the Chippendales empire. The cold case murder of Nick DeNoia was suddenly about to become something much bigger.